Good afternoon, or indeed good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to today's 3D printing industry webinar. I'm Paul Hanafi, a technology journalist at 3D Printing Industry, and I'll be your host for today's event, in which we'll take a deep dive into driving innovation with Peak 3D printing. Peak 3D printed parts present extensive business opportunities, but there are still some challenges to overcome. Bond 3D has developed a novel additive manufacturing technique that allows the manufacturing of parts made from virgin PEEK with the same chemical and mechanical properties as the base material. So to help me unpack this technology, we have a brilliant pair of speakers lined up for you today. So today we have Mark Kunst, Manager of Sales and Business Development at Bond 3D, and Harman Baumer, an application engineer also at Bond 3D. Fabulous. So thanks for joining us today, Mark. I believe you have your colleague next to you there as well.
Correct. Harman is sitting next to me. There he is.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Hi, gents. How are we doing?
Very good, thanks. All fine. Looking forward to the session. So
Brilliant. So I believe you have a presentation for us today. Shall we get things started with that?
yeah, sounds good.
Fab. The floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So thanks for the intro. Welcome. As mentioned, I'm Mark Kunst, responsible for sales and business development, and next to me is Harman, who's application engineer, and we'll tell a bit more about that later in the session. Already mentioned, but if you have questions, feel free to ask, drop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as good as possible. And if too complex, we'll get back to you via email, or we can set up a separate call. Documents will be shared, as will this presentation. So feel free to make notes, but you will get a hard or digital copy of the documents discussed. So introduction. Today's goal is to learn you more about PEEK solutions and end-use applications. And the other thing is awareness and inspiration for new applications. So PEEK is a very diverse and high-end material. Makes it also very complex to 3D print with it, but that's something we have managed to solve. But you can do some pretty neat things with it. And well, we hope that today's session will give you a bit more context on what is possible. And hopefully you'll reach out to us with some fresh new ideas. So after the tech introduction, Harman will be presenting a bit about the case. So there's a lot you can do with PEEK, but we want to show you the steps that you need to take to get to a feasible design by a real-life application. So in this case, it's the energy market, where we've been developing or are developing a pretty disruptive new product. Harman said we'll elaborate a bit more about it after the first part of our session. Brings us to the company itself, Bond 3D. We are a 3D printing service provider, so that means that we are selling parts on our own machines, though. So the machines have been developed in-house. We were founded in 2014. We've grown quite significantly, 80 people at the moment, and we are, let's say, specialized in printing high-performance polymers. So we started with PEEK, with the idea that if you can print with PEEK, there's a lot more possible. So as mentioned, we have engineering and production, which kind of differentiates us from the market as well. So we can manufacture parts, but we can also guide the whole process of engineering, so designing, FEM analysis, the whole package to get to a feasible product. As mentioned, own system and own software, and the result of that is a unique voidless FDM technology. So we print with fused deposition modeling, and voidless means 99.8% density with PEEK. Pure PEEK in that case, so that's basically injection molded level, and therefore we say that we are capable of replacing metals, of course, and where, let's say, for example, chemical resistance or the mechanical strength of PEEK as a material is good enough that it can compete with a metal. So on the right bottom, you see some of the materials that we can or have already printed, which is 450G, which is currently our industrial grade. But we are developing with 450 CA30, which is carbon reinforced. But we're also printing with the medical grades of Victrex for spinal cage, but a bit more about that later. So as mentioned, we are an end-to-end service provider. So that means that we can do anything from manufacturing parts up to the whole design thing. We basically have three business units. One is responsible for manufacturing. One is responsible for R&D, so making our printers better, quicker, and so on. And the third one is, of which Harman is already or also part, is the application team, which we call engineering solutions, because there's a lot more than just manufacturing parts. There's a whole lot of complexity behind that as well. But I would say the main focus of Bond3D is to make critical end-use applications, so in serial. So you can use us for prototyping, of course, but the main and ultimate goal that we have is to manufacture at scale for critical end-use applications. Important to mention, it's exciting times. Next week will be Formnext, of course. This will be the second time that we are exhibiting at this fair after COVID. We got quite some new and disruptive solutions that we are presenting there. So if you're in the medical field, if you're in energy or also semiconductor or any other industry, feel free to drop by and take a look at the parts that we have for inspiration. But also our engineering team will be there to answer any questions that you might have. And interesting to note, as you can see, we're having a design course for additive, which is being held on the Thursday. And on our website, you can see, let's say, how to connect there. But we're looking forward to meeting you there, and any inspiration that today's session might give, feel free to drop by. We can help you live with making parts from different technologies printable with Peak. So definitely pay us a visit. And on the left bottom, you can see where we are. We're in 12.1 B121. Okay. Then some background information. Most of you, I guess, are quite into 3D printing already, but maybe just on one slide. We're in the material extrusion category, which is FDM. And of course, we print with plastics. And then the most high-end plastic there is, PEEK, as mentioned. And of course, FDM has its limitations and strengths. I will not mention them all, but of course, let's say FDM printing is one of the most used technologies in the world in all sorts of, let's say, fields and in all sorts of materials, basically. That brings us to the bond technology. Basically, we're in what we call a landscape of different manufacturing technologies. So you are using CNC machining, you're using injection molding, or you're also using other types of manufacturing technologies, which is great. We always say keep on using that. But of course, these technologies also have their downsides. And of course, downsides can mean limited shapes, long lead times, all sorts of different things, which might make you to reconsider, let's say, using a different type of technology. And that's why we present ourselves as an addition to your landscape. You should just see us as another tool in your toolkit. Sometimes you want to injection mold, machine, or print with the bond technology, but then with a known material like PEEK in this case, and also with the mechanical properties of this material, making it much easier to adopt using 3D printing with PEEK. There's basically two USPs that differentiate us from the rest of the market. So one is isotropic strength, which means strength in all directions. And the other thing is voidless printing, like mentioned, the 99.8% density injection molded level, which is, of course, pretty unique in the world. We combine that with, on one side, the advantages of high-performance polymers, and on the other side, the advantages of 3D printing. And the honest story we always tell is you need to check at least 2 boxes on the left and 2 boxes on the right to make our technology a good fit for you. If it's more than that, even better. If it's less than that, then probably one of the techniques on the previous page is going to provide you with a more economical solution. But of course, a remark to make is that additive manufacturing is still improving every year. So that means that 3D printing is becoming quicker, the tolerances are improving, surface roughnesses are getting better. So investing in additive also means you're investing in the future, and therefore it's always good to consider using this. So what makes us different than all the others in the market? On the left you see filament. This is basically feedstock of most of the printers in the market. We chose to do that the other way around. So basically we adjusted our machine in such a way that the material stays intact. And we do that with a rod. You can see it over here. It's roughly the size of a pen. Why this is so nice? Because of the high stiffness of a material like PEEK, we can use a pure material. And in this case, this is 450G, but we can make any material into a feedstock rod like this. And in principle, develop it for printability depending on what grade it is. But at the moment, as said, we're already doing that with CA30, a medical grade. In the future, there will be more grades, but if you have specific interest there, always feel free to drop a note. So conventional FDM works with the extrusion process. We do as well, of course. Nobody uses over extrusion, destroys parts, destroys your equipment. So most of them are focused on under extrusion, which is of course something you don't want, and I'll explain a bit more about that now. So with under extrusion, you extrude your first, let's say, layers, and then you extrude the other, let's say, parallel path of more layers. And what you basically see with under extrusion, if you disconnect where the surface areas touch, you can see that there's only very limited surface where material is really connected to each other. So that ensures that parts in Z direction are not so strong. And that's typically something we did not want to sacrifice on. So our technology is really built and made to overcome, let's say, that over extrusion problem. And we do that with what we call a patented technology with pressure control printing. And pressure control kind of works with a contour line on one side, a contour line on the other side, and then in the middle it extrudes what we call the pressure line, and the pressure line seals off the surface completely. So it means that basically we need three lines of material to print void-free. And as we print with two types of nozzles, 0.3 and 0.6, that means we roughly need 1 millimeter thickness of a wall, or roughly 2.1 millimeter of thickness of a wall. Well, there's a lot of complexity around the void-free printing, but what we basically have is feeder force and uplift force, where the uplift force ensures the amount of material that gets extruded, and the feeder force regulates the pressure, which is a continuous feedback loop, ensuring that at all times we get extruded the right amount of material to get the 99.8% density that we promise. So we already explained what flow control printing does for other FDM technologies. So for us, basically, it looks like the three scenarios you see down here: a small, moderate, or large gap, depending on the, let's say, behavior of the material. Because as you know, PEEK is quite prone to shrinkage and warpage, and therefore the compensation is needed in order to get the perfect parts out. And this is then how it looks like under a microscope. So on the right side, you see what we call void-free. And on the left side, you see the clear example of under extrusion. And then demonstrating that you are void-free. If you do some leak tests, in this case, you can see that we pressurize the pressure vessel with 100 bars, and no detectable air is coming out on the right side, where on the left you see air escaping. And this is, let's say, with air. But we've also achieved the helium leak tightness with just 2 millimeters of material. So that's basically what the virgin or neat material promises you as well. Here, an example of isotropic strength in the part. We designed this pressure vessel that you saw on the previous page. We pressurized it, and it's 115 bars. It shattered. You can see at the FEM where that should be occurring, and of course that occurred there as well, which kind of supports our claim of isotropy, because you don't see delamination over the layers, but you see it bursting like it would happen if you have the same with virgin material. And then some examples of strength. So we promise 95 in all directions. And you can see the red dot, which means that our material is still certified after printing, where others are using a filament. So you need to requalify the material. In our case, you don't have to do that because the material is already certified. You just certify your design in that case, and that makes using 3D printing a lot easier for an engineer. And this is our printer. So as you can see, these are the cartridges where the material is kept, as I mentioned. We have the possibility to print with multiple materials. We also have 3 printing nozzles. So that means in the future, we are able to create hybrid parts. So printing, for example, 450G combined with CA30 for highest strength and chemical resistance, or let's say after future development, different types of material. The build room is 400 millimeters in cubic. So that's roughly the maximum size that we have. And I would say the largest part we've printed so far is in the range of 300 millimeters. But we are rapidly developing, so I expect that early next year we'll be able to utilize the full size of our build room. And then another important thing is the process monitoring. So as mentioned, we focus on critical end-use parts. So that also asks something from registration and things like that. So we have our own software for that. And we can basically monitor any parameter in our process to ensure that quality is where it should be. And we have roughly 16 printers at the moment and 7 test setups on which we release new hardware and new software. The technical data sheet. So basically, we promise ISO 2768 cores as printed. And with optimization, you can go a bit better there. There are possibilities to tap thread or insert or place inserts in the material we have because of the density. And all the other parameters I already mentioned, like let's say tensile strength and things like that. But in this case, contact us. We have what we call a technical data sheet of our process, which helps a lot to start manufacturing. And the same goes for the design guidelines. So we more or less follow the standard FDM guidelines with some specifics left and right. In this case, also contact us. We can tell you more about it. So we have software, as mentioned, on our system, which we've written ourselves. As you can see, FDM is built up line after line. And the nice thing about our software is that it also has shrink compensation. So I would like to highlight that specifically. As mentioned, peak is quite prone to warpage, as you can see in our example. And here you see an example of two parts printed, one without compensation, where you can see the deformation, and one has been compensated, where you can see we were able to suppress it by a factor 5.5, which is, of course, quite significant for a material like peak. Then post-processing, Armin and me will tell a bit more about it later, but post-processing is, of course, a big thing because with only printing, you're not there yet. What we see with a lot of others, they advise to use epoxies, for example, to get smooth surfaces or have the materials leak tight. That's something we don't need with our technology. So we can just print and it's the same. You get sealing surface like you would get with a neat, let's say, manufactured peak card. And it also means that we can go for the most optimal orientation in terms of printing. Like this, you would like to orientate it upside, as you see here. But what most would recommend is turning it like this because you have the orientation in XY, and that's the strongest of 3D printing. Where in our case, as you can see, that's not needed. So in terms of post-processing, for example, you manage to reduce the costs in that perspective. And then voidless means leak tight, as I mentioned. So what we've proven is to be helium leak tight. Also isostatic strength in the part, as you can see in the test on the right side. And one of our main markets is also semiconductor industry, which requires high purity. Our parts have been approved for being used in vacuum environments. And this is an example of a very simple product, but also, let's say, it quite well exposes the strengths or weaknesses of the technology. Here you can see a backer ring with a scarf cut, and as you can see, it's very bendable, showing the ductility of the material that we print, which is of course important for quite a lot of applications. Okay, how to replace parts with A and peak parts. It's used quite significantly as a replacement for metal. We see that in a lot of different market segments. So the static mixer and the camera housing are a nice example of something which was metal but got turned into 3D peak because of its chemical resistance and also because it's simply lighter. And then there's like the insulating ring, which was peak on itself, but you can enhance it with an infill because it's an insulating part and with air pockets that functions even better. So nice to highlight maybe are some of the applications that we are working on and will be in serial next year. So the first one is automotive. Because of the leak tight nature of our products, we are quite good at printing leak tight, but on the other hand, also very light. And of course, for racing, that's a very big USP as people try to get to the boundaries of what technologies can do. And we are in the fortunate position that the products that we have manufactured have been qualified for Formula E. So that means from next year onwards, we'll be driving around in those cars. And also we are talking to several Formula One racing teams, but of course, that's still under development. The other nice, let's say, claim that we have is that of next year, our parts will be used inside an ASML machine, meaning that lightweight is important for high machine output. And with our solutions, we can contribute to that. Energy is a big market for us that we've been working on a lot, where people like our technology because we use pure materials. And Peak has been the workhorse of the energy market for around 40 years already. But as of next year, first products will be going in downhole environments. And I think Harman's case that he will be presenting is a nice example of something where we aim to make something quite disruptive that has never been done before. but then with additive manufactured PEEK. And the last one is medical, which is also a main focus of Bond together with Victrex and Envibio. This year, we're already working on, studies to ensure that additive manufactured PEEK cages will be used inside the human being next year. So we're filing for FDA in the US if all goes well. And then next year, the first cage will be inserted in a human being. So I think just high over, it should give a quite interesting idea of what our technology is capable of. And all these applications are very demanding, but our technology can live up that expectation. Before Harman starts, on the cases that we have, I would like to take you in the steps how to start with additive for critical applications. So step by step, I'll just try to elaborate a little bit, and the cases that Harman is going to be presenting takes over those steps and tries to elaborate a bit why we made certain choices and how you can use this manual basically for constructing your own parts. So the first, it's a simple question, but what is the business model that you pick? So you want to buy a printer, or do you want to get service provided? So buying a printer, you have the technology close to you, but you also need a lot of knowledge to service it, as well as you need to have enough products to fill it on. So that's why we see a lot of companies that start with service providing. They work with a company that already has the knowledge, can help them, of course, manufacture, products at a lower scale so they can step in easier. Then pick the right technology. So there's a lot of different technologies like powder-based, extrusion-based. There's a lot of metals. And of course, depending on the environment you want to use, ensure you pick a technology that makes sense for what you want to achieve. And based on that, of course, what material are you going to use? So is it a chemical harsh environment where, for example, a material like PEEK can withstand quite well, or do you need a metal because of a higher mechanical strength? Those are all the questions that you need to ask up front. And then, which is very important, and in our opinion, we see too little still, are what are the design guidelines for technology being used combined with the mechanical data sheet. So luckily, we see more companies that are onboarding on one side the design guides, and on the other side the mechanical data sheet, so that design engineers from their organization can use these tools to construct parts that actually get used. But a lot of data is sometimes missing, and that's why, for example, as Bond 3D, we have made a data sheet on a lot of, manufactured parts and other things that are collected and can be used for that purpose. And then the sixth thing is don't over-specify based on conventional techniques. So most of the drawings that we see are having extremely highly tolerated surface finishes, for example, which is logical if you're coming from machining. But ask yourself the question: is this also really needed? And I would say in 5 out of 10 questions, cases that's not needed, so it can be relaxed. But if you're talking about sealing services, for example, where you need an O-ring or a liquid tight connection, then some machining could be needed. And in that case, with our technology, that's very well doable. And the last part is building confidence and start simple. We see a lot of people that are under time pressure in projects. They don't have time to pick up additive on the side. So sometimes you can run a parallel path or start with something simple, just to prove that it actually does what it should be doing. And that's also the case with the project that we're going to present. And then, some key challenges. As you can see, I'll go through them a bit quicker, but you need to validate technology and material. In our case, you need to specify what you want to test and make sure you get the proper results. It can take up to a year to ensure that you have enough confidence to start working with it. And the other thing is work with a known material, so you can basically skip the material qualification part. And that's what I would say is nice about our technology. You can go straight to design qualification. And then redesigning. We see a lot of cases where there's not enough knowledge in the company to facilitate those kind of things. So what we as a company do quite significantly as well. At workshops like our webinars like this one, but also workshops at customers to get people more, the design guides for additive in their DNA. And of course, it's sad but true, problems always create solutions in different angles. So when people are in a situation where they need a solution, additive can sometimes help to get over a certain boundary. And post-processing, not to be underestimated, is a business case killer a lot of times. If you don't think about this upfront, you might end up getting a part which is too expensive to get a good business case with. So that's why it helps to design upfront, keeping your post-processing strategy in mind. And then the final thing is the cost per part. Create a business case and apply the above, so you get an as good, let's say, package to be successful if possible. But in most of the cases with additive manufacturing, let's say the real benefit comes from a better total cost of ownership. So something which goes faster, gives more output. And the other thing is you can have it in your hands quicker or develop it. So that's also definitely added value that we see. Yeah, then we're going to the 3D printed peak casing that we've been working on. And I would like to give the word to Harman.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so this is a case that we take from the energy market. Energy market consists of also of manifolds, backup rings, seals, and labyrinth seals in turbines. So we do a lot of things, different products in that market. Today we will talk about. Let me see.
Yeah, you need to scroll.
I'm not on the right screen. I'll use this one.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
No worries.
So today we'll talk about 3D peak pump casing. The question of the customer is, can we investigate if a pump like this can be printed using high performance polymers in a downhole environment? The current case is the conventional sucker rod pump. It is used as an artificial lift pump to pump up oil in depleted oil fields, which do not have enough pressure to get the oil up on their own. The challenges for this are energy usage and research usage. So a lot of high carbon emission and high material costs come with this type of pump. So an alternative is wanted for this. The alternative that the company came up with is the axial piston pump. So this is a downhole pump which uses pistons to create pressure and the flow, and it can create similar output at much lower energy consumption than a sucker rod pump. Using this pump downhole does mean that it's in a very harsh operation conditions. It is 3 miles below the surface. That means 300 bar operating pressure, 125 degrees Celsius, and the fluid that's being pumped is very corrosive. Therefore, the current design has been created from super duplex steel, which is very hard to manufacture. This leads to some issues like long lead times, high cost of manufacturing. The flow is limited because of the shape restraints, because of the conventional machining methods, and there's the issue of forming of scaling on the surface of the pump. So this leads to a short surface interval. The pump has to be taken out of the well, which leads to a high cost of maintenance.
Yeah, and I think in this case it even costs 100k USD to get a pump up, and
because it takes a day, and the well is not working for a day. So yeah, that takes that leads to a high cost for that.
Yeah.
If we want to do this project successful, we have some boundary conditions. The requirements of the application need to fit. We need knowledge of the 3D printing system. You need material that is isotopic strong and has a material density that is close to 100%. We need to work with a known material so that we have the right strengths that we need. We need guidelines and date sheet for the material. As Mark explained, we have that for our process. We will go to a FEM analysis to check if our products will supply the good material values. Then we need a proper post-processing strategy, because it is a product with high standards and high tolerated surfaces. And after that, we need to do testing to see if everything works, of course.
Yeah, and I think nice to add here, in this case, the customer says, well, we're specialized in the oil field industry. We don't want to do everything, in this case, ourselves. So they asked us to basically do the development for them. And they're basically connected to us in terms of a sparring partner for getting there. But all the real work has been done by Bond3D, which Harman will elaborate on.
So this is the schedule that Mark already showed you. choices that were made up front. So the company wanted an engineering service, not to do it themselves. They want to use FDM as it leads to high strength, leak tight products with a lot of freedom of shape, which we can use to reduce stress and increase the flow of the pump. And we want to use PEEK 450G because of its chemical resistance, its strength, it's a proven material, and the scaling will be much less than on a steel pump. The steps that we need to take still is then the use of the design guidelines for our technology. So we need to adapt the design as it is for our products and for our process. Then we will need to work with our mechanical data sheet. We're going to do an FEA analysis to check if the pump will work in the conditions as stated. Then we check the drawings for the specified tolerances, because the pump in PEEK will be different from the pump in steel and function as well. So we need to review all those tolerances, and then we need to build confidence. So we start simple. That's stated here. We divided the project in 2 phases. Phase 1 is we have performed that already. It's a feasibility study and a proof of concept. So the current design has been copied of the pump. We just print it as is in our material. We do not change anything. We just make it work for our process. That means that we have to make the operating conditions fit the material and the design of the pump when printed as such. In phase 2, we are going to improve it for 3D printing. So we are going to change the design. We are going to improve it for flow and for stress so that we can get back to those operating conditions that we need. Key challenges for this, the material PEEK, of course, has a different strength and stiffness than the Super Duplex. It's much less stiffer. The strength is much less. Post-processing is difficult of PEEK. It will deform a little bit during when you compress it too much. It will deform after post-processing because there's internal stresses and the operating conditions, of course. The 3D printing also offers a lot of opportunities. That is why we do it. We can do the flow optimization in the pump. We can do a stress reduction through design. We can change internals, and we can create them such that they could not be if you do the conventional machining. The scaling will be reduced, which is a big improvement for this pump in particular. We can do function integration, so we can create less parts. It will be cheaper to manufacture, also shorter manufacturing time, and in the end, that leads to a total cost of ownership that is improved. So first, we performed an FEA analysis. This shows that the stressors would exceed the material strength. You can see that in the picture on the left. At 300 bars, you get a nice red area, so the pump would fill. In the picture in the middle, you can see that the pressure channels are indicated with red. So this is where the pressurized oil is flowing through. So that's also leading to the stress shown on the left. What we did, we tuned the operating conditions such that we have a safety factor of 2 applied to our material, and that leads to an operating condition of 50 bar. And then you can see that the material will hold, and we can do our testing. So first of all, we have to do a redesign for 3D printing as it was designed for the additive manufacturing, for conventional machining, sorry. So on the left, you can see how it is being manufactured conventionally. It will be drilled, machined from 2 sides. So you get a channel which has a strange angle, which leads to a stress concentration, as you can see in the little cutout on the left. In our process, we don't need it, and it is actually hard to print it like that. So we change it to the one on the right, which improves flow already, as you do not have a dead point in the channel, and also it reduces the stress concentration. In addition to that, we added a wall in the big hole that is indicated with the red circle. It is the suction channel of the pump. It needs a large surface. Therefore, in the steel version, it was machined like this. In the PEEK pump, this will lead to too much deformation, as the material has a much lower Young's modulus. The wall was added. We had a more equal distribution of the stress because of that, and we can use our process because of it. So we have to adapt the model as it is for printing. We need to print a shape that can be machined later on. In the picture on the right, you can see the part as it should be, with the surfaces in red indicating the surfaces that are being machined. These are surfaces that have sealing purposes, for example, or where the pistons are in, or where the bearings are in. So those need to have very tight tolerances. The surfaces that are not indicated red will be as printed in order to reduce cost. So we do not need to machine everything. We can check what do we really need. The rest can be as it is, and it will save cost.
Yeah, I think this is an important lesson learned for us as well, because when you first look at the drawing, you think like you need to touch everything.
Yeah.
This starts the business case, and I think by talking in this case with the customer, you come to the realization that you don't need to touch everything. So we specified only what's needed, which is very beneficial for the cost of the product itself.
It is always the first step that we take.
Yeah.
Talk to the customer. What do you really need? Is it really everything what's on the drawing?
Yeah.
So on the left, then you can see the part as we will print it, we have printed it, because we need to add some extra material where we are going to do the post-processing. So we printed a little bit bigger, what we call near shape, and then after that, the surfaces are being post-processed. Before we print it, we do a design verification. We take a section-wise approach for this. This is because it's faster to develop, and we can do faster iterating if we need to change something. And also it saves a lot of time and cost because of that. What we do is sample testing. So in the picture on the top, you can see burst testing, for example. We pressurize a part and check if it really has the strength that it's necessary. This is a first step in the validation of the material strength. And we do not do this every time, but to get the confidence for the customer, we can provide this. Then we can do some flow testing. You can see the tube printed in the bottom picture. We have printed tubes with different structures on the inside to see what kind of structure will give the best flow in the pump. And then, of course, we can do some scaling testing. In this case, we put the part in an environment with the fluid that's being pumped up and see if the scaling really is less than on the steel pump, which has been proven already. So then we go to the step of manufacturing of the pump parts. You can see in the picture on the left the slicing that we do in our own software, which is critical for our process because we need to have the pressure lines in between the flow lines. And there's a special algorithm for that to get it in such a way that the parts always leak tight. With that, a G-code is provided to the printer that leads to the part in the middle picture. It is the printed part near shape. We have done, in this case, a CT scan of the part, which is shown in the right picture. So you can see that the material is 100% or 99.8% dense. We do not have any voids in the part.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an achievement for Peak, as it's very difficult to manufacture part. And what you see is getting this high density in a tensile bar is already difficult. And I don't think a lot of people can do that. But getting it in an actual part, that's what really matters. And well, that's what this picture is trying to show, is that we can really do something extra with manufacturing additive parts out of Peak.
Yeah. So the next challenge is to post-process this part. What you see is that what we talked about already is the tolerances are specified for metal usually, so we have to shift to the polymer. It is a little bit harder to machine because of the low Young's modulus. It will flex a little bit. Also, the model can relax after machining. It is printed on some high temperature, which leads to some internal stresses. Our solution is to anneal the part after printing. So we slowly heat it up, leave it at a certain temperature, and then slowly cool it down, which will remove all the internal stresses from the part, and which means that after we machine it, the part won't set anymore and is at the right dimensions. The biggest challenge in post-processing is still the clamping it on the machine. Steel parts you can just fix with a clamp or with a screw or whatever, and it will be in shape. But this part, because of the more flexible material, it can deform, and then you machine it and you take it off, and it doesn't have the right dimensions. So there's a big challenge in mounting it to your machine in such a way that doesn't happen. Solution for this is custom tooling, and we are pretty good at getting that right. The pump parts have all been manufactured in this manner. After this, we have assembled it. You can see some pictures of the assembly here. we used the original pump parts that have been used in a downhole pump as well, from the steel version. What we took was the configuration for high flow. You can mount it in different configurations with a different angle of the swash plate for the pump. We took the most extreme example for this to prove our point that the pump is working in this configuration. So we tested the pump. You can see in the picture that it is mounted to a large electric motor. The graph indicates the flow. The theoretical achievable output is shown in the red line. The actual output of the metal pump and the polymer pump are shown in dotted lines below. The orange lines are for the metal pump, the blue lines are for the polymer pump. What you can see is that the output is pretty equal to each other in terms of flow. So what we have proven is we can make the pump from polymer PEEK and get the same flow as the steel pump. What we want now in phase 2 is to get an increased version of the pump, an improved version of the pump. So our goal is to improve the flow. We want to get it 10 to 15% higher at high RPMs. So indicated by the green line in the graph. Also, we need to get to that stated operating condition of 300 bar. Both things can be done changing the design. We are working on that at the moment, and we're confident that we get there. What we'll do in the next phase is to print it in 450 CA30 PEEK, which has 30% carbon fibers in it to increase the stiffness of the part and the strength. And then we will print a 450G liner in it for the chemical resistance. We can do this because of the multiple heads in our printer. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, sure. So then where are we now with the end of phase 1? So like mentioned, we realized a weight reduction of 83%, which is nice to have, but not instrumental for, of course, functionality. What's indeed very important is, of course, the faster lead time, which in this case the customer was looking for. So we went from 8 months to 1.5 months. And of course, the longer service time we have tested so far is 50% better. So that means that in this case, the pump needs to be lifted once every 2 years rather than every year. And in terms of scaling, the cleaning can be much easier. So all in all, what we try to do in phase 1 is do the feasibility. I think making a product like this from additive in a high performance polymer has never been done before. So that was a great first step. But we're really looking to exceed expectations and take a next step and go for downhole testing, which is what we also have planned for next year if all goes well. So all in all, a pretty disruptive product. But like Harmen mentioned, if you take some of those guidelines that we described in mind, you can make the right choices to get to a functional end product in a high performance polymer like PEEK. So like said, the conclusion here was that the PEEK pump was viable, which was great, of course, and the advantages of applying additive manufacturing, like you can see here, for example, the faster iterations, the testing of features, reducing development time rather than doing the entire pump in one go, reduce the weight, and of course also the manufacturing time. We'll follow up on that in some next steps, but at least for this was quite successful. We learned a lot from it, but in that case, the customer also learned a lot from it. And what we're trying to sketch here for you as well is try to consider what additive with PEEK can mean for you. And of course, in that case, Harmen and me would be very interested to get into dialogue on how to use additive manufacturing for your own benefits. So some lessons learned from the project that we did. Picking the right technology and material is instrumental for being successful. Start simple, but ensure you start. Like I said, we see a lot of people that have 1,000 reasons to not start with it because of time pressure and other things. Make sure that within your company you have something like an AM competence group or an additive roadmap where you can see what additive technologies make most sense for you to use. And of course, create a data sheet. So a lot of our customers have our design guides and our data sheet in their system available for the engineers to use it to construct parts, which is a very good way of getting it adopted in your company. But getting there, of course, requires some testing, like we just mentioned. So if you would like to learn more about how you could do that, well, we already have experience there. So reach out to Harman and me, and we'll gladly give some more info there. Optimized designs for 3D printing, reducing the costs and also post-processing costs. So when we started going to the market, we got a lot of requests. Can you make this, square block or something else? That's of course not what additive does. So try to strip it to the bare minimum of what you need in terms of functionality, and then you can manufacture, which is also economical, interesting. And yeah, specify on what you need rather than the technology that you're picking. So if you're used to machining a part, try to see where you can relax, share that with the printing company you work with. They'll get something much more economical to you. And share AM knowledge. So this session sessions like these are good, but as mentioned, we also give on-site design workshops. So if you're interested in that, reach out. And of course, we always say that so printing is not a solution to everything. Earlier in the story, you mentioned it's a tool in your toolkit. So use it when it's beneficial for you. And we're not here to sell you just 3D printing, because that's simply not how it works. But if together, let's say, we can, enlarge the knowledge in people's design groups, more things will be printed, which is good for everybody. So that's kind of the purpose of what our presentation today had. That brings us to the Q&A. Like mentioned, we are at Formnext. Harman and me will be there, but more of our team will be there. So feel free to drop by. The parts that you're seeing here will be presented there, as much more others. So reach out, mail us for an appointment, or just drop by. But we look forward to meeting you. Paul?
Hi guys, thanks so much for that. It's very detailed and informative stuff. I see that we've already got a little bit of response in the comment section.
Okay.
If you're interested, just speaking to the viewers here, if you're interested in getting some questions over to the guys, make sure that you put them in the Q&A section rather than the comment section, so that we're all looking in the same place. So yeah, feel free to enter your questions there. Mark, Harman, would you mind making a start?
No, sure. Of course, always good to answer questions. We'll try to answer them as good as we can. And if you want to deep dive a bit more into it, we can always schedule a separate meeting. So let's see what we have. Okay, let's start on the top.
Yeah, I heard PEEK can be food safe. Is this true? Yes, this is true. PEEK is a food safe material. It also has to be produced then in a food safe manner, of course. We are working on a medical machine to be able to make the implants for your body. So we can make machines like that, but we have to adhere to certain cost standards. That is not at the moment there, but we can work on that.
Yeah, and I think, like mentioned, Victrex is one of our shareholders. So we print, in theory, any material from their portfolio. They have specific FG grades, as they call it, which are food grades. So in principle, like I've shown you the rods, if we can make rods out of it, we can also print food grade types. So if you want to know more about it, drop us an email and we can tell you a bit more about how a project like that look like. Okay. The other question is if we provide the equipment. So at the moment, as mentioned, we are a service provider, so we print on our own machines. So good to mention that the machines are uniquely property of Bond. So it's not a machine we buy that we manufacture the parts on. The machines are built in-house by ourselves. We just for now are choosing to service on it. That might change in the future.
Next question is, can we have the link of the recorder? I think that is one for you, Paul. Okay, that is clear then. How do you print the parts?
I was just going to say, I was just re-emerging to the stage to confirm, yes, we will have the session recorded and it will be released later on, so stay tuned for that.
Great, thanks. So next question is, how do you print supports? We print supports out of PEEK. We print at a high temperature because of the material properties, and there is not a soluble support or an easy way to print supports otherwise. So we print supports out of PEEK and we remove them afterwards. If we can, we do a breakaway. If we have to, we machine it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I think the next one is also for you, Harman. Test pressure was reduced to 50 bars to not exceed the modulus for PEEK, but the actual use pressure is 300 bars.
Yeah, exactly. Good question. In phase 1, we have reduced it to 50 bars as we wanted the proof of principle. We reduced it to have it in such a way that the casings could be used as they are designed now. So this is not optimal for the material or the process. In phase 2, we are changing the design. We are adding some features to be able to work at 300 bars again, still using the peak, of course. Cannot tell you how because it will be patented, but we are confident that we will get there.
Yeah, and I think maybe good to elaborate. We started simple because we did not want to spend too much effort in seeing if it is feasible or not. So sometimes it helps to narrow the scope a bit to make it more, easy to get the feasibility out. And now that we got the feasibility signed off, then we can go for a more longer and more complex design and manufacturing step, basically.
It's really to get the confidence of the customer. They heard of us, they want to know what we could do, not put the time in for the redesign, because that also takes time and money, of course.
Correct.
So in this way, we could prove that we can do it.
Yeah. Do you have a design guide for your machine? What is the minimum feature size, specifically wall thickness? Maybe you can answer the question. The first part, yes, we have that. So drop an email to sales@bond3d and we'll gladly share those with you. But maybe you can already answer the feature size, the wall thickness.
Wall thickness, Mark already mentioned it a little bit. We have a 0.3 millimeter nozzle and a 0.6 millimeter nozzle. We need 3 lines to print leak tight. So you can do the math. We need minimum of 1 millimeter wall thickness to make leak tight parts.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and as mentioned, so guys, feel free to drop and we'll gladly share some design guides with you. How far are we from having printed peak devices in hospitals based on point of care printers? So that's not a business model we have at the moment, but I know that other companies like Kumovis, for example, are working on that. So I think we are not too far out. Some cases it's already there. I think it needs to get more industrialized in the future as well, but the concept is already there. It's not at the moment our main focus area, but yeah, again, that might change. As I said, we are working on spinal cages, which are body implantables, and maybe point-specific care could be something in the future. The printer capabilities. How many workpieces that the printer can print per day?
It's a specific question. It's a difficult one. It depends on the size of the part, of course. So what we do is we nest. If we print a small part, we can print a lot of parts on the build plate, and the printer can produce those at once. We have a big part, we have to do one at a time. So yeah, it really depends on your application. Yeah, cannot go into detail in that anymore.
If you have a geometry of which you're interested to benchmark, feel free to send it over. So we normally take a 2D and a step file, and then we can just run it in our software and provide you the answer of how many we could manufacture and at what cost. So we'd also like to challenge you to share that information with us. And then, do you perform the final cleaning of the spinal cage implant? So in this case, the project we are working on, we work with a partner, and they will be taking care of that part of the business, basically. So it's happening together with the partner. Okay. Any other questions? I think we kind of answered most of them. So
yeah, thanks for that, guys. We're coming towards the end of our time now anyway, so I think we'll wrap things up there. Thanks so much for your contributions today. If you haven't had your question answered, or if you're maybe a bit shy to have it answered in the public domain, feel free to join us in the networking session, which is up next. Hopefully we can get those answered for you. And yeah, I just wanted to add, thanks so much, guys, for providing such a deep dive into your technology and that application. I'm sure everybody found it very interesting.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. I mean, it was great to tell the story. And like I said, we're at Formnext, so we hope to see a lot of you in real life if you're there. And if not, and you're still interested, drop an email. We can set up a call or be in contact in whatever way. And yeah, maybe see you in the session after this, which is for some more in-depth discussions if wanted, I believe.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, thanks so much for your presentation again, guys. We'll see you at Formnext. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. See you then.
Cheers, guys. Bye.